Clara Bellamy slammed both hands flat on the county clerk's desk and leaned in close enough that the man finally looked up from his papers. "You are not taking my sisters," she said. "Not in 60 days. Not ever." The clerk didn't flinch. He slid the notice across the desk with 2 fingers, the way a man slides something unpleasant toward someone he has already stopped thinking about. "The law doesn't care what you want, Miss Bellamy. No legal household, no recognized guardian, the girls go to Cheyenne. That's final." Clara picked up the paper. Her hands were steady. Her heart was not. She walked out of that office with one name in her mind, and no idea whether that name would save her or humiliate her beyond recovery. Ethan Caldwell. Before this story goes any further, if this is the kind of story that stops you in your tracks, please subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far Clara's story travels. Now let's go back to Red Hollow, Wyoming, and find out what happens when a desperate woman knocks on the door of a man who made a promise to a dead man. The paper said 60 days. Clara read it 4 times, standing on the courthouse steps in the full summer heat of Red Hollow, Wyoming, because she kept expecting the words to change. They did not change. They sat on the page in the clerk's cramped handwriting, immovable and indifferent, and what they said was this: without a legal household and a court-recognized guardian, Lily and June Bellamy, ages 9 and 6, would be remanded to the state orphan home in Cheyenne before the summer was out. Clara folded the paper, once put it in her pocket, and walked. She did not walk back to the boarding house where she rented a room above the laundry. She did not walk to the church or to Mrs. Paulson's or to any of the places she normally went when things were bad. She walked to the edge of town and stood at the fence line where the road turned north toward open cattle country, and she looked out at the distance and let herself think for exactly as long as she could afford to think. Her parents were gone. Her father first, then her mother, both within 2 years of each other, both taken by the kind of quiet, relentless sickness that didn't announce itself until it was already finished with you. There was no other family. There was no money beyond what she earned cleaning rooms at the boarding house, which was enough to keep 3 people fed at the edge of enough, and no further. There was no man in her life, had never been a man in her life. The town of Red Hollow had made its opinion about Clara Bellamy's prospects abundantly clear over the years, in the small cuts that well-practiced cruelty delivers, without ever quite committing to a single blow. She was 25 years old. She was a large woman in a world that treated a woman's size as a moral failing. She had rough hands and patched dresses, and 2 little girls who depended on her for everything, and she had 60 days. She had one name. She turned around and went back to Mrs. Paulson's, where she had left Lily and June that morning, and she stood in the doorway and watched them for a moment before they saw her. June was chasing one of Mrs. Paulson's cats around the yard with the pure, joyful energy of a child who still believed the world was essentially a good place. Lily was sitting on the fence watching her with that careful 9-year-old gravity she'd carried since their mother died, like she'd taken on the job of worrying so June wouldn't have to. Clara watched them and felt the paper in her pocket like a coal that hadn't cooled yet. Then she squared her shoulders, walked into the yard, and told them she'd be back by supper. She had a call to make. 2 miles north of town, the road curved east through a stand of cottonwoods before opening up into the broad grass country where Ethan Caldwell ran his cattle. Clara had passed the fence line 100 times without turning in. She turned in now. The Caldwell Ranch was built the way a man built something when he intended it to outlast him, heavy-timbered, solid-footed, no waste, and no ornamentation. The house sat back from the road behind a proper fence, and the gate stood open, the way a gate stands open on a working property where traffic is expected, and security is a matter of reputation rather than locks. Clara walked up to the front door and knocked. Nothing happened for a moment. Then she heard boots on a wood floor unhurried, and the door opened. Ethan Caldwell looked at her. She had seen him in town, the way you see anyone in a small town, at a distance in passing enough to form an impression. The impression she had formed was serious man, fair man who does not waste words or motion. Up close, the impression held. He was lean and weathered, the way outdoor work made a man with dark hair going silver at the temples, and eyes that were direct without being aggressive. He had a hammer in one hand and grease on his forearm, and the look of a man who had been in the middle of something useful. He looked at her and he said, "Miss Bellamy." Clara blinked. "You know who I am." "You look like your father," he said. She had not expected that. She had prepared herself for half a dozen versions of this conversation, his confusion, his polite distance, his refusal, and not one of those versions had started with those 4 words. She felt them land somewhere behind her sternum and stay there. "May I come in?" she said. "Yes," he said, and stepped back. The kitchen was plain and clean. He set the hammer down and moved to the stove without asking, and poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of her and sat down across the table. He did not study her the way men in town studied her that particular traveling appraisal, the slight recalibration that happened behind their eyes when they looked at a woman of her size, the way consideration became dismissal between one breath and the next. He simply sat down and waited to hear what she'd come to say. That alone was enough to make her throat tight. She made herself speak. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "I'm going to tell you something that is going to sound like I've lost my mind, and I need you to let me finish before you say no." He held his cup. "Go ahead. The county is going to take my sisters." She put the paper on the table between them. She did not look away from his face. 60 days. Unless I can produce a legal household and a recognized guardian under the law." She breathed once. "I need a husband. Not a real one, not in any way you don't agree to. A legal marriage on paper for long enough to satisfy the county and keep Lily and June out of the state home in Cheyenne. After that, any arrangement you name, I'll honor it." The kitchen was quiet. Ethan looked at the paper. He looked at it for a long time, not reading it, Clara thought, but thinking. She could not tell what he was thinking, and his face did not offer her any help. Then he said, "How old are the girls?" "Lily is 9, June is 6. No other family. None that will take them." He turned his coffee cup slowly in both hands. He had careful hands. She noticed a working man's hands, scarred and calloused, but precise in their movements. "Your father," he said. "Did he ever tell you about the Powder River?" Clara felt the paper under her fingers go still. "He told my mother. I was in the other room." Ethan nodded once slowly. "He pulled me out of a crossing that should have killed me. Creek was running high and cold and I went under. He went in after me." He paused. "I tried to give him money afterward. He refused it." "That sounds like him," Clara said, and she kept her voice flat and level by main force of will. "He asked me to make him a promise instead," Ethan said. "He said if my children ever need something that's in your power to give, don't look the other way." He looked at her across the table. "I gave him my word." "He's been gone 2 years," Clara said. "You don't owe that promise to me." "No," Ethan agreed. "I owe it to him." A long moment passed. "So you'll do it," Clara said. She needed it said plainly. She was not leaving this kitchen with anything that could be interpreted 2 ways. "Yes," Ethan said. Clara put both hands flat on the table and breathed. She had told herself on the walk over that she would not show him how desperate she was, that she would hold herself together regardless of his answer, because the answer wasn't the end. There would always be something else to try, some other door to knock on, some other way to fight. She had told herself that because it was the only way she had been able to make her feet move down this road. But now she understood she had not quite believed it, because the relief that moved through her at that one word yes was the relief of a woman who had run out of other doors. She looked up. Ethan was watching her. Not with pity, not with the satisfaction of a man who had done a charitable thing and expected to be recognized for it. He was watching her the way he'd been watching her since she sat down steadily, directly as a person he was simply and plainly paying attention to. "I want to be clear," she said, because she owed him clarity if she owed him nothing else. "I'm not asking you to feel something you don't feel. I'm not asking you to pretend anything. I'm asking for the protection of your name and a legal address for my sisters, and I will work for everything I cost you. I'm not a woman who doesn't pull her weight." "I didn't imagine you were," he said. "And when the county is satisfied, Clara," He said her name the way he might say, "Stop," quietly and without heat. "I understand what I agreed to. You don't have to build fences around it." She looked at him. "All right," she said. She extended her hand across the table. He shook it. Firm grip. Straight look. The handshake of a man conducting a matter of serious business with a person he intended to deal with honestly. "Ethan," he said. "If we're doing this, use my name." "Ethan," she said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Thank me when the county's satisfied and your sisters are home." She stood up. She picked up the county paper and folded it and put it back in her pocket. She was at the door when he spoke again. "Your father talked about you," he said. "He said you were the one who held the family together. Said you always had even before you needed to." Clara kept her hand on the doorframe. She did not turn around because her face was doing something she did not want him to see. "He was generous," she said. "He was accurate," Ethan said. She walked back down the road toward town, and she did not let herself fall apart until the cottonwoods closed around her and there was nobody on the road in either direction. She stopped and put her back against a tree and pressed both hands over her mouth and breathed hard through her nose until the wave of it passed. It wasn't grief exactly. It wasn't even relief exactly. It was something that didn't have a clean name, the sensation of having been seen accurately and without agenda by someone who had no reason to look carefully and had looked anyway. She gave herself 60 seconds. Then she straightened up, smoothed her dress, and walked on. Her sisters needed supper. The wedding was 11 days later in Judge Harlan Price's office, which smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper, and the particular mustiness of a room where serious things happened routinely and without celebration. The judge was a small, precise man who performed the ceremony in under 10 minutes, with the efficiency of someone who had done it several hundred times and saw no reason to dramatize what the law already took seriously enough. There were no flowers. Clara had not wanted flowers. Lily stood beside Clara with June's hand in hers and watched Ethan Caldwell with the focused, unblinking appraisal that 9-year-olds applied to things they hadn't decided about yet. She had been quiet since Clara told them. Not upset. Lily was never exactly upset. She was calculating, always calculating, but watchful, in the way that meant she was collecting information before she committed to a verdict. June had already rendered her verdict. June had rendered it 40 minutes after meeting Ethan, when he had crouched down in Mrs. Paulson's yard to her eye level without being invited and said, "What's your favorite animal?" "Horses." June said immediately, without hesitation, in the tone of someone stating a fundamental truth. "I have 12, Ethan said. June turned to Clara with an expression of absolute vindicated triumph, as though Clara had personally arranged the existence of 12 horses for her benefit, and that had been that. The judge said the words. Ethan said his part. Clara said hers. She kept her voice even throughout, and when the judge said "you may," and Ethan turned to her, he did not do what she had braced for. He did not lean in for a performative kiss in front of her sisters and the judge. He looked at her and gave a slight nod, as though they had just sealed something between them that required no public display, and that was somehow worse than anything he could have done because it was so precisely right that it made her chest ache. The judge stamped this paper. Ethan Caldwell signed it. Clara Bellamy signed it. And just like that, Lily and June had a home. Outside on the courthouse steps, Lily said, "Are we going to the ranch now?" "Yes," Ethan said. "All of us." "All of you," he said. Just like that. A fact. A settled thing. Lily looked at Clara. Clara gave her a small nod. Lily looked at Ethan for one more long moment with that weighing expression. Then she said, "June's going to want to see the horses first thing." "I figured," Ethan said. Something shifted in Lily's face. Not quite a smile. Lily was conserving smiles until she was sure they were warranted. But something in the set of her jaw loosened, and Clara, who could read her sister the way she could read weather, understood Lily had not decided yet, but she had decided to wait and see, which in Lily's economy of trust was approximately the same as a handshake. They loaded into Ethan's wagon. The girls sat in the back. Clara sat in the front beside Ethan, and they drove north on the road she had walked 11 days ago, and nobody said much, and the silence was the comfortable kind. The kind that didn't need filling. The kind that meant everyone was simply present in the same moment, without requiring it to be anything other than what it was. When the ranch came into view, June stood up in the wagon bed despite Clara's immediate, "June, sit down," and pointed and said, "That's our house." "June, that's your house," Ethan said without looking back, which was worse than ignoring it, because it confirmed what June was saying and made Clara unable to pursue the safety argument with any real conviction. June sat down, but she was vibrating with it. That first evening, while the girls mapped the house with the thoroughness of explorers who had been given a continent and intended to document every square foot of it, Ethan walked Clara through the property. Not a tour, she understood that already. A briefing. Here is the well. Here is the cold cellar. Here is where the firewood is kept through to spring. Here is the root store. Here is the latch on the barn that sticks, and the way you have to lift and push simultaneously to get it right. He told her these things, the way he would tell anyone who needed to know them, in order to function plainly with the assumption that she was capable of retaining information and acting on it without supervision. Clara had spent years navigating men who simplified things for her, who slowed down, who watched her face for the cues that she wasn't following, who managed information to her in careful spoonfuls, rather than simply speaking to her as a person who could think. Ethan did not do any of that. He talked to her like an equal, which was at once the simplest and the most radical thing anyone had done for her in a long time. When they came back to the house, he said, "You'll have the large bedroom upstairs." Clara stopped walking. "That's yours." "Was mine," he said. "I'll sleep near the barn. I'm up before first light most mornings, and I don't want to wake the girls." "Ethan, it's practical," he said in the tone of a man who had thought this through and arrived at a conclusion that was not open for renegotiation. "The arrangement works better this way. Accept it." She looked at him. He looked back. "All right," she said. She lay awake that first night in a bed that was wider and softer than anything she had slept in since before her father's first bad winter, with the county paper tucked inside her Bible on the nightstand, and she stared at the ceiling and thought about the word practical. Practical was a man who gave up his bedroom without making it feel like a sacrifice. Practical was a man who talked to her like she had a brain. Practical was a man who had 12 horses and answered a 6-year-old's question without being asked. She had come here for a legal arrangement. She had not come here expecting to have to manage feelings about it. She closed her eyes and told herself to sleep. She did not sleep for a long time. The first morning she came downstairs before dawn and found the stove already lit and a full pot of coffee already made, and Ethan at the kitchen table with a ledger open in front of him, writing in it with the focused, unhurried concentration of a man doing a thing he had done every morning for years. He looked up. "Coffee's ready." "So I see," Clara said. She poured a cup and sat down across from him. "What time do you usually eat?" "When there's food," he said, and went back to his ledger. She looked at him. "I'm going to cook." He started to say something. "Don't," she said. "I'm going to cook. I need to do something useful, or I'm going to lose my mind inside this house. Where's the flour?" He told her. An hour later. Lily and June came downstairs to a table set with biscuits and salt pork and fried eggs from Ethan's yard chickens, and they sat down and ate with the particular silent intensity of children who had learned that food was not always reliable, and that drawing attention to your hunger might mean there was less of it. Clara watched them and felt that tight wire of constant vigilance in her chest, the one that had been running at high tension for 2 years, loosen one single notch. The biscuits kept coming. There was butter on the table. Lily ate 3 biscuits and then looked at Clara with a question in her eyes. "You don't have to save any," Clara said quietly. "There's more." Lily took a 4th biscuit and then a 5th, and she did it without apology or self-consciousness. And Clara looked down at her own plate because her face was doing the thing again. From across the table, without looking up from his eggs, Ethan said, "I'll need help with the south fence this afternoon, Collins, after you're done with the water troughs." He said it to Collins, his young ranch hand who had come in from the barn and was now eating at the far end of the table. But the effect of it, The easy domestic normalcy of a man discussing the day's work while children ate biscuits at his table was something Clara felt in her spine. This was what a family sounded like. She had not heard it in 2 years. The town had opinions about Ethan Caldwell's sudden marriage, and it shared those opinions freely with the enthusiastic thoroughness of a community that has been given something worth discussing. Clara heard the shape of it within the first week, not directly, because the people of Red Hollow were not quite bold enough to say things directly to her face, but in the pauses in conversation when she entered shops, in the way eyes moved to her, and then away, in the comment Mrs. Hargrove delivered to her friend on the mercantile steps at a volume Clara was clearly meant to overhear. "I always said that woman would find a way to make herself into someone's problem," Mrs. Hargrove said. "Poor Ethan. He's too decent to know when he's being taken advantage of." Clara kept walking. She had been walking past things like that her entire life. She knew how to keep her face still and her stride even, and let it go past her like water off oiled leather. What she had not accounted for was Ethan. The first Sunday after the wedding, they went to church because the county expected a household that functioned like a household, and Clara was going to give the county exactly what it expected, and afterward on the steps, Mrs. Hargrove positioned herself directly in their path with the precision of a woman who has been planning her moment. "Ethan," she said in that bright particular voice. "My goodness, quite a change taking on a ready-made family." Ethan stopped. He looked at Mrs. Hargrove, and in the silence that followed, Clara felt the air change the way air changes before weather arrives. "I didn't take on anything, Mrs. Hargrove," Ethan said. His voice was perfectly even, not cold, not heated, just completely unmovably certain. "I married a woman I respect. Her sisters are my family. I'd call that being given something, not burdened with it." A pause. "Good morning." His hand came to the small of Clara's back. Brief, natural, the touch of a man who had done it 1,000 times. They walked down the steps. Clara kept her face forward. She did not look at Mrs. Hargrove. She did not look at the other people on the steps who had heard every word. She kept walking with Ethan's hand at her back, and June chattering about the preacher's hat, and Lily doing her careful thinking face, and she breathed. She had been defended before. Her father had defended her every time until he couldn't anymore. She had forgotten what it felt like to have someone stand in front of what the world said and call it wrong. She had forgotten what it felt like to not be alone in it. She kept walking. She kept her face still. And somewhere under all the discipline and the self-containment and the 2 years of learning how to manage everything alone, something cracked open, just slightly, a hairline fracture in the wall she'd built so carefully, and let a thin, cold light in. That evening, she came out to the porch and found Ethan in one of the wide-seated chairs, looking out at the land going dark at the edges. She took the other chair. She did not plan what she was going to say. She simply sat. After a minute, she said, "You didn't have to do that today." "Yes, I did," he said. "Why?" He looked at her. Direct, steady, no performance in it. "Because what she implied wasn't true, and I don't let things that aren't true stand if I can say otherwise. That's just how I'm built." Clara looked at the pasture. The light was going gold and long. "They think I maneuvered you," she said. "Used my father's debt to trap you. I know what they think. It doesn't bother you." I was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "A man who lives by what other people think ends up living their life instead of his. I made this choice. It was mine to make. What they do with it is their business." She turned to look at him. "You're a very certain man." Something moved in his face that might have been the beginning of a smile. "I've had time to figure out what matters," he said. "Takes a while usually. I'm a slow learner in some things." She looked at him a moment longer than she meant to. "What did my father tell you about me?" she said. "Exactly." Ethan thought about it. "He said you were the one everybody leaned on. Said you never complained about it. Said he worried sometimes that you were so good at holding everybody up that nobody ever thought to hold you up back." He paused. "He said that wasn't right. That it wasn't fair to you." Clara turned her face back toward this pasture. "He said that," she said. "He did." She sat with that for a moment. The last light was pulling back from the grass, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the east, faint and tentative. The way stars came in summer, when the sky was still competing with the last of the day. "I came here to save my sisters," she said. It was not quite a confession, and not quite a warning. It was the thing she needed to say aloud, so she would not forget it. "I know why you came," Ethan said. "I didn't come here expecting—" She stopped. "Expecting what?" She shook her head. "Never mind." He didn't push. He simply sat with her in the quiet, which was exactly the right thing to do, and which she noted without knowing what to do with the noting. "Good night, Ethan," she said and stood. "Good night, Clara." She went inside. She stood in the kitchen in the dark for a moment, her hand on the counter, her eyes closed. Her father had worried that nobody ever held her up. He had worried about it. He had said it out loud to a man he'd pulled from a river. He had carried that worry about her all the way to his death. And somehow, in a way that she could not have planned for, and could not have predicted, and could not quite afford to examine too closely, that man from the river had found a way to answer it. She stood in the dark kitchen of a house that was beginning against all probability to feel like it might someday be called hers. She listened to the sounds of it, the creak of old wood settling the low sounds of the cattle from the far pasture, the small rustlings of two little girls asleep upstairs in a room of their own for the first time in years. She did not let herself cry, but she pressed her hand flat against her chest for a moment, over the place where something had cracked open earlier today on the church steps, and she thought, not yet. Not yet. There was too much still to lose. She was not going to let herself believe in this until she was sure she was allowed to. But the crack was there, and it was already letting the light in, whether she allowed it or not. The crack that had opened in Clara's chest on those church steps did not close overnight. She had hoped it might. She was practical enough to know that hope was a dangerous thing to carry in a situation as fragile as hers, and she had spent 2 years training herself out of the habit of it. Hope made you careless. Hope made you lean on things before you'd tested whether they could hold your weight. But the crack stayed open, and the light kept coming in, and there was nothing she could do about it except keep moving. She kept moving. The days fell into a rhythm, the way days did on a working ranch, purposeful and early and full. Clara was up before the girls, which meant she was up before dawn, which meant she arrived in the kitchen each morning to find Ethan already at the table with his ledger and his coffee, and the particular focused quiet of a man who had already been awake for an hour, doing the thinking he needed to do before the day demanded his body. They had developed without discussing it a kind of morning language. She poured her coffee. She started the stove for breakfast. He read from the ledger or looked over supply lists. Occasionally, one of them said something, a question about provisions, about what Collins was doing that day, about whether the south pasture gate needed replacing before winter, and the other answered, and then quiet resumed. It was the most comfortable silence Clara had ever sat inside. She did not examine that too closely. What she did examine carefully, and with the methodical attention she applied to things she needed to understand, was Ethan himself. Not because she was looking for something, because she couldn't stop noticing things. She noticed that he was harder on himself than on anyone who worked for him. She noticed that he thanked Collins and Brewster for their work plainly without ceremony. But he thanked them every day, which was not something men in positions of ownership were required to do, and which most of them didn't bother with. She noticed that he kept a running account in the back of his ledger of small amounts owed to him by various people in town, and that beside most of those amounts there was a notation she eventually deciphered as W.O. written off, forgiven without discussion, without the recipient ever knowing. She noticed that when June climbed into his lap one evening at the kitchen table with a picture she had drawn and demanded his assessment, he studied it with total seriousness. A crayon horse that looked more like a lopsided cloud, and said, "The legs need work, but the eyes are right." And June had looked at him with an expression of profound artistic satisfaction, and climbed back down and gone to make corrections. She noticed that Lily had started sitting closer to him at supper. Lily, who had not fully trusted any adult since their father died, was closing the distance between herself and Ethan Caldwell, 1 inch at a time, with the painful caution of a child who had been hurt by loss and was not going to be caught off guard by it again. Clara saw it happening and felt two things simultaneously, and they were in direct conflict relief, so deep it was almost physical, and a fear so sharp it made her hands unsteady when she thought about it directly. Because she knew what she was watching. She was watching her sisters fall in love with a life they hadn't been promised they could keep. And she had 60 days now, 43, before the county came to verify whether this was real. It was Brewster who first made her understand how the town was really talking. She had gone to the mercantile on a Thursday to buy flour and salt, and the specific kind of hard candy that June had apparently been dreaming about, and Brewster had been there ahead of her loading supplies into the ranch wagon. He was a quiet man in his 50s, leather-faced and sparse with words, and he had treated Clara with consistent, unremarkable respect from the first day she arrived. Not warmth exactly, but the solid, uncomplicated decency of someone who extended courtesy as a matter of character rather than calculation. Howe was at the counter when she came in, and the shop owner, a florid man named Greer, was telling him something in the lowered voice that meant he thought he was being discreet. "Can't be real is the thing," Greer was saying. "Ethan Caldwell never looked twice at a woman in 5 years, and now he marries a stranger inside 2 weeks. The Bellamy girl's clever, I'll give her that. Played it just right." Brewster said nothing. "I feel for the man is all," Greer continued. "Decent fellow too, decent for his own good sometimes. You work with him, has he said anything about it?" Brewster was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Ethan Caldwell is the most clear-eyed man I've worked for in 30 years. He doesn't do anything he hasn't decided to do, and he doesn't decide things for reasons he hasn't thought through." He picked up the supply box. "I'd be careful about feeling sorry for a man who doesn't need it." He saw Clara standing just inside the door and gave her a single nod, not apologetic, not embarrassed, just acknowledging. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, and carried the box out. Clara stood in the doorway. Greer had gone the color of a boiled beet. Clara walked to the counter, put her list on it, and looked at Greer with an expression she had copied from her mother, who had been an extraordinary practitioner of the kind of stillness that made other people feel every word they'd ever said. "Flour, salt, and the peppermint sticks," she said. "Please." Greer got the order together in complete silence. She took the package home, and she did not say anything to Ethan about it, because there was nothing to say that he didn't already know. The town had its story. The town had decided what kind of woman she was, and what kind of fool he was, and no amount of counter-argument from her was going to change that. The only thing that would change it was time and conduct, and she had 43 days to prove the county wrong, which was a different and more important problem than proving Greer wrong. But that evening when Ethan came in from the south pasture and washed at the pump and sat down to supper, she looked at him across the table and said, "People are talking." "People always talk," he said, and reached for the bread. "About you specifically, about your judgment." She kept her voice level. "I don't want that." He looked at her. "Clara." "I mean it, Ethan. You've got a reputation in this county that's worth something. I didn't come here to—" "Stop." He said it quietly, but with enough weight to stop her. He set down the bread. "I know what you're doing. You're building yourself an exit. You're deciding in advance that this is going to cost me something, so that when the time comes, you can leave without feeling like you took anything." He looked at her steadily. "I'm telling you to stop doing that." Clara said nothing. "I knew what I was agreeing to when you sat down at my table," he said. "I'm not a man who makes agreements and then resents them, and I'm not a man who needs protecting from town gossip about his own wife." He picked up the bread again. "So let it go." Lily was watching both of them with that careful, measuring look. June was eating her salt pork with complete serenity. Clara let it go, but she filed away the word he'd used, wife, and the matter-of-fact weight he'd put on it, and she did not take it out again that night. She was not ready to examine what it meant that the word had stopped sounding like a legal term. It was the chairs that broke her finally and completely. Not broke her in a bad way. Broke her open the way ground. Broke after a long freeze, suddenly all at once with a kind of release that felt violent only because of how long the pressure had been building. She had been in the ranch 3 weeks when she noticed it. She was helping Collins move some furniture in the storage room. They were making space for a proper desk for Lily, who had taken to doing her reading at the kitchen table and needed a surface of her own. And in the back of the storage room behind an old cabinet, she found a stack of lumber that had been worked, planed smooth, cut to specific dimensions. She stood looking at it and felt something twist in her chest. She went to find Brewster, who was repairing harness in the barn. "That lumber in the storage room," she said. "The worked pieces. How long have they been there?" Brewster considered his harness. "Ethan cut them about 2 weeks before you arrived," he said. "Figured he'd need wider pieces for the chairs and for the desk he was planning for the girls." Clara stared at him. 2 weeks before she arrived. He had been preparing for them before she ever knocked on his door. Before she ever put his name on that paper at her kitchen table in the rented room above the laundry. He had made his promise to her father, and then he had gone quietly and started preparing lumber for chairs that would hold her without apology. A desk for girls he hadn't met yet, because that was what this man did when he had given his word. He did not wait. He did not make gestures. He prepared. She walked back to the house and stood in the kitchen with her hands on the counter, and the particular feeling of someone who has been trying very hard not to be moved and has just discovered they never had a chance. She did not cry, but it was the closest she'd come since the cottonwood tree on the road home from his door. The county inspector arrived on a Wednesday. Clara was at the stove when she heard the wagon in the yard, and something in the particular quality of that sound, official, unhurried, purposeful, made her go still before she even looked out the window. She had been waiting for this. She had known it was coming. She had rehearsed it in her mind a dozen times. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door. The inspector was a narrow man named Colton, with a briefcase and a notebook, and the expression of someone whose job it was to be unconvinced. He introduced himself to Clara with professional courtesy, looked past her at the house with the practiced eye of someone assessing a situation rather than experiencing it, and asked if her husband was available. "He's in the barn," Clara said. "I'll get him." "No need," Colton said. "I can find him. I prefer to speak to household members separately." The words hit her like cold water. Separately. He wanted them separately so that he could compare their stories and find the gaps. He wanted separately so that they couldn't signal each other, couldn't align their accounts, couldn't present a unified front. He wanted separately because it was his job to determine whether this household was genuine or convenient, and the most efficient way to make that determination was to pull it apart and see if it held. Clara stood in the kitchen doorway and listened to Colton's footsteps cross the yard toward the barn and felt the bottom of her stomach drop clean out. She had not prepared for this. She had prepared for questions she and Ethan could answer together, how they met when they decided what their arrangement was. She had not prepared for the possibility that he would speak to Ethan alone without her, without any way for her to know what was being asked or what was being said. She had not prepared for the fact that she didn't know what Ethan would say. She knew he was honest. She knew he was not a man who performed things he didn't feel. She knew that if Colton asked him the wrong question in the wrong way, Ethan Caldwell would tell the truth, the way he told everything plainly, directly, without embellishment or protection. And that the truth laid out plainly was, a desperate woman asked me to honor a dead man's promise, and I said yes. Which was true. Which was also in the ears of a county inspector, looking for reasons exactly the kind of truth that ended in Cheyenne. She stood in the kitchen and waited. Lily appeared at the top of the stairs. She read Clara's face in an instant, and came down quickly and quietly and stood beside her. "Who is he?" she said low. "County man," Clara said. Lily's jaw set. "What does he want?" "To make sure we're a real family." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We are a real family." The simplicity of it knocked the air out of Clara. "I know," she said. "Does he have to agree?" "Yes," Clara said. "He does." Lily thought about this. Then she straightened her spine in the exact way their mother used to straighten hers when she was deciding something, and she said, "Then we'll make him agree." Clara looked at her. "We tell the truth," Lily said. "We just tell all of it." Colton came back from the barn 20 minutes later. He came to the kitchen table and opened his notebook and asked Clara to sit down. She sat. She kept her hands in her lap, where he couldn't see that she was pressing them together. He asked his questions carefully and in order. How long had she known Mr. Caldwell before the marriage? What the nature of their acquaintance had been? Whether the children had been informed of the arrangement and how they had responded? Clara answered. She answered honestly because Lily was right, and because anything less than honest would crack under pressure, and she could not afford a crack. She said they had known each other by reputation for years, and had spoken directly only in the weeks preceding the marriage. She said the arrangement had been mutual, and that the children had adjusted. She said what was true. Then Colton said, "Mrs. Caldwell, in your assessment, does your husband view this marriage as a matter of obligation or of genuine commitment?" Clara went very still. She heard the question for what it was. It was not a trap. It was a genuine inquiry from a man whose job was to determine intent. And she understood in the moment she heard it that the answer she gave would determine everything. She thought about the chairs. She thought about the lumber in the storage room cut to specific dimensions 2 weeks before she arrived. She thought about, "You look like your father," and the way he'd said her name on the courthouse steps and the hand at the small of her back after Mrs. Hargrove. She thought about a man who forgave debts in the back of a ledger and taught June about horse eyes and thanked his hired hands every day without making a ceremony of it. She thought about what commitment looked like when it was not performed. "Mr. Colton," she said, and her voice was steady. "I came to Ethan Caldwell's door with a county notice and nothing else. He could have turned me away. He didn't. He has given my sisters a home and stability they hadn't had in 2 years. He has treated me—" She paused, and the word that came was the true one. "He has treated me like a person of value every single day. Whether the law calls that obligation or commitment, I can only tell you what I've watched him do, and what I've watched him do is show up. Every day without drama and without resentment, he shows up. That is not what obligation looks like, Mr. Colton. That is what a man looks like when he has decided something and means it." Colton wrote in his notebook. Clara waited. Then the kitchen door opened, and Ethan walked in, and he stopped inside the doorway, and he looked at Clara first. Not at Colton, not at the notebook, at Clara, with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Something open in it. Something that didn't have the careful self-containment he normally carried like a second skin. He looked at her like she had said something out loud that he had only allowed himself to think. "Mr. Caldwell," Colton said, "I have one more question." Ethan came to the table and stood. He did not sit. "Go ahead." "I spoke with you at length in the barn," Colton said, "and I want to verify your answer here in front of your wife. I asked you why you married her. You said—" He looked at his notes. "You said I made a promise, and I kept it." He looked up. "I'd like to give you the opportunity to add to that." Ethan was quiet. Clara did not look at him. She looked at the table. Then Ethan said, "I married Clara because I gave her father my word that I would not let his children face this world alone. That's the truth, and I won't dress it up into something it wasn't." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but entirely without uncertainty. "But I'll tell you something else that's true. I have had this ranch for 11 years. I have run it alone for 11 years. I ate alone and worked alone, and at the end of every day, I sat on that porch alone, and I told myself that was enough because I didn't know what else to say about it." Another pause. 3 weeks ago, Clara Bellamy came through my gate, and now there are biscuits on my table in the morning, and a child who corrects her horse drawings, and a 9-year-old who is deciding every day whether I'm worth trusting. He looked at Clara then directly with that open thing still on his face. "That is not obligation, Mr. Colton. That is what a man sounds like when he has realized, rather later than he should have, that he has been given something extraordinary." The kitchen was completely silent. Clara felt something move through her from the crown of her head to the soles of her feet, like the first moment of warmth after you've been cold for so long you forgot what warm was. Colton wrote in his notebook for a long time. Then he closed it. "I'll file my report this week," he said, and stood and shook Ethan's hand and nodded to Clara and left. The wagon rolled out of the yard. Clara sat at the kitchen table. Ethan sat down across from her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Clara said in a voice that was very close to not steady, "You didn't have to say all of that." "Yes, I did," he said. Same words as the church steps. Same quiet certainty. "Ethan." "Clara." He leaned forward slightly. "I have been a plain-spoken man my entire life. I am not going to start being dishonest to a county inspector at 36 years old." His eyes didn't waver. "Everything I said in there was true." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "Then stop apologizing for it," he said. "And stop waiting for the floor to fall out. It's not going to." Clara looked at her hands on the table, at her scarred knuckles and her rough skin and the cheap ring on her finger that they had bought from the jeweler in town for $3 because they needed something for the ceremony. She said very quietly, "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Trust that something is real." She looked up. "I haven't had a lot of practice with things that stay." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know. I haven't either." He held her gaze. "But I'm not going anywhere, Clara. That's not a performance. That's just what's true." She believed him. That was the most terrifying thing that had happened to her since the county office. She believed him. Lily found out about the inspector from June, who had been eavesdropping from the top of the stairs with the complete shamelessness of a 6-year-old who did not yet understand that eavesdropping required concealment. June told Lily that a man with a notebook had come to decide if they were a real family, and that Ethan had said they were extraordinary. Lily came to Clara that evening while Clara was washing up. "Did we pass?" she said. "We'll find out this week," Clara said. Lily nodded. Then she said, "He told the truth, didn't he? Ethan." "Yes. I heard him." Lily leaned against the counter. "He told the truth even when he didn't have to, even when something easier would have worked." Clara kept washing the dishes. "That's the kind of man he is." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think I've decided." Clara looked at her. "About whether to trust him," Lily said. Clara's hands went still in the wash basin. "What did you decide?" Lily lifted her chin with that particular 9-year-old dignity. "That he's earned it," she said. "And that I'm going to let him know." She walked back out to the porch where Ethan was sitting, and Clara watched through the window. She watched Lily sit down in the chair beside him. She watched her say something. She watched Ethan go very still, and then very slowly turn to look at the small girl beside him, and whatever expression was on his face in that moment, Clara could not see it from where she stood. But she saw his hand come up and rest briefly on Lily's shoulder, and she saw Lily for the first time since their mother died lean into it. Clara turned back to the dishes. She pressed her lips together hard and breathed through her nose and told herself, "Not yet. You are not allowed to be certain yet. The county hasn't answered. The 60 days aren't finished. The floor can still fall out." But somewhere beneath all of that, beneath the discipline and the caution and the 2 years of learning to hold herself completely alone, something was shifting. Something that had been braced against impact for so long, it had forgotten what it was braced for. Something that was beginning slowly, and without her full permission to put its weight down. To let this be real. To let this be home. The county letter arrived on a Friday. Clara was hanging laundry when she heard the mail rider come through the gate, and something in the particular way. Ethan crossed the yard to meet him deliberately, without hurrying. The way he moved when he already knew what was coming and had decided to meet it. Standing up made her hands go still on the sheet she was holding. She watched him take the envelope. She watched him look at it. She watched him walk toward her. He held it out without a word. She took it. She opened it standing right there in the yard with the laundry half hung and the summer heat pressing down on everything, and she read it in 10 seconds, and then she read it again because she needed to be certain. The county had approved the household. Lily and June Bellamy were recognized as legal dependents of the Caldwell household. No further review was scheduled. The matter was closed. Clara stood with the letter in her hands and felt 60 days of held breath leave her body all at once. She did not make a sound. She simply stood there, and the paper shook slightly because her hands were shaking, and Ethan stood across from her and said nothing, which was the right thing, which was the only thing. After a moment she looked up. "It's done," she said. "It's done," he said. She nodded once like a period at the end of a sentence. She folded the letter. She put it in her apron pocket next to the one that had started all of this, the clerk's cramped handwriting. 60 days, Cheyenne, and she turned back to the laundry. "Clara," Ethan said. She stopped. "You can breathe now," he said. She turned to look at him. He was watching her with that direct, unperforming gaze, and in it, she saw something she had begun to recognize over the past weeks, the particular quality of his attention, the way he looked at her, not as a problem to be managed or a situation to be navigated, but as a person he was actually interested in. "I'm breathing," she said. "You've been holding yourself like you're waiting for it to fall apart since the day you arrived," he said. "It didn't fall apart. You can let go now." She looked at him for a long moment. "I don't know if I remember how," she said, and it came out more honest than she intended. Ethan's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "Then we'll figure that out," he said. "Same as everything else." He went back to work. Clara stood in the yard with the summer heat and the half-hung laundry and the letter in her pocket, and she thought same as everything else. As though figuring out how to be a person who didn't constantly brace for disaster was just another thing on the list, right alongside the south fence and the root cellar and the cold store provisions for winter. She almost smiled. Almost. She told the girls that evening at supper. June received the news the way June received most news, with immediate and total emotional commitment. She pushed back her chair, threw her arms around Clara's neck, said, "I knew it, I knew it, I knew it," at a volume that made Collins, who was eating at the far end of the table, look up with an expression of mild alarm, and then climbed down and threw her arms around Ethan's neck in exactly the same way, which was the first time she had done that, and which made Ethan go very still for a moment before his arms came up and held her careful and certain the way big hands held small things they intended to protect. Lily did not throw her arms around anyone. Lily looked at the letter Clara placed on the table in front of her, read it through completely, read it again, and then looked up at Clara with eyes that were bright in a way she was working hard to control. "So we stay," she said. "You stay," Clara said. Lily looked at Ethan. "We all stay." Ethan met her eyes. "All of you," he said. "For as long as you want to." Lily pressed her lips together. She looked back down at the letter. And then she did something Clara had not seen her do in 2 years. She let her face go all at once, every careful muscle of it, and she cried. Not the quiet, disciplined grief she had cried when their mother died, the kind that came out in small, controlled pieces, because she thought she needed to hold herself together for the rest of them. This was something different. This was relief, and it shook her whole small body, and she didn't try to stop it. Clara went to her immediately and put her arms around her and held on. Ethan got up from the table quietly and took Collins out to the porch on the pretense of discussing tomorrow's work, giving them the kitchen, giving them the privacy of a moment that didn't need witnesses. Later, after the girls were in bed, Clara found him on the porch. "Thank you," she said, "for leaving." "I know when a room doesn't need me in it," he said. She leaned against the porch rail and looked at the dark. "Lily doesn't cry like that," she said. "She hasn't cried like that since our mother." "I know. She's been holding her sisters up since she was 7 years old." Clara paused. "She doesn't think I notice, but I notice." "She got that from you," Ethan said. Clara looked at him. "Holding everybody up," he said. "Not letting people see the cost of it. She learned it from watching you do it." He paused. "It's a good quality. It's also a hard way to live." Clara was quiet for a long time. "My father said something like that," she said finally. "I know," Ethan said. "He said it to me." The night settled around them, and the stars were out, and somewhere in the dark, a coyote called, and Clara stood on the porch of a house that was beginning without her full permission to feel like hers, and she thought about what it meant to finally put the weight down. She was beginning to find out. The shift happened. The way most significant shifts happened. Not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulation of small ones that you only recognized as a pattern when you looked back. It started with the flour. She had been making bread 3 times a week since she arrived. It was cheaper than buying at the mercantile and better besides, and it was something her hands knew how to do without instruction. The week after the county letter, she was elbow-deep in dough when she realized she had automatically doubled the batch. Not because anyone had asked her to, not because she was calculating provisions, simply because she had, without thinking about it, started planning for a household that was going to be here next week, and the week after that, and the winter after that. She had stopped treating this as temporary. She stood in the kitchen with flour on her arms and understood that her body had made a decision. Her mind was still negotiating. The second shift was in how she talked to Ethan. In the first weeks, she had been careful. She had been courteous and competent, and she had asked about the ranch work with the measured interest of a woman doing due diligence on a situation she was managing. She had not asked personal questions. She had not volunteered personal information beyond what was required for basic coexistence. That changed. She didn't notice it changing until she was in the middle of a conversation about the winter cattle count, and she said without planning to, "My father used to say the cattle know what the weather's doing 2 days before any person does. He watched them more than he watched the sky." Ethan had looked at her with real interest. "He was right," he said. "What else did he say about it?" And she told him. She told him about her father, and then she told him about her mother. And then they were sitting at the kitchen table after supper with the girls already in bed, and 2 cups of cold coffee between them, and she had said more about her family in one evening than she had said to anyone since the funerals. It came out of her the way things came out when pressure was finally released, not in a flood, but in a steady, honest flow that didn't stop until it was finished. Ethan listened the way he did everything. Completely, without interrupting, without redirecting, without making it about something else. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me about the cattle drive, the part your mother told you." She looked at him. "The Powder River," he said. "Tell me what your mother said about it. I want to hear your version." So she told him. She told him about the creek running high and cold, and her father going in, and the man he pulled out. She told him about her father refusing the money. She told him what she remembered from the other room of a quiet conversation between 2 people who loved each other. When she finished, Ethan was looking at the table. "I was underwater for longer than he knew," he said. "When he got me to the bank, I couldn't stand for about 10 minutes. He sat on the ground next to me and didn't say anything, just stayed." He paused. "That was your father." Clara felt the familiar tightness behind her eyes. "That was exactly my father," she said. They sat in the quiet kitchen, and something between them settled into a different shape, less the careful courtesy of 2 people in a managed arrangement, and more the ease of 2 people who had earned each other's company. It was Ethan who broke the silence, and what he said was not what Clara expected. "I need to tell you something," he said, "about why I've been alone." Clara went still. He looked at her directly. 11 years ago, before I had this ranch, I was engaged to be married. Her name was Helen. She came from a family in Laramie." He paused. "She decided 6 weeks before the wedding that marrying a man who intended to spend his life working cattle land in Wyoming was not the life she wanted. She broke the engagement and married a banker in Denver." Another pause. "I'm not telling you that to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because I spent the next 11 years deciding I was fine alone, and I was wrong about that. And I think you deserve to know why I built 12-foot walls around everything." Clara looked at him. "You don't have 12-foot walls," she said. "I did before you came," he said. She was quiet. "I'm not saying that to—" He stopped, started again. "I'm saying it because honesty matters to me, and this is something honest, and you've been honest with me from the first day." Clara thought about Helen in Laramie, and a man who had spent 11 years sitting on a porch alone and calling it enough. She thought about Ethan building chairs and cutting lumber and forgiving debts in the back of a ledger and thanking people who worked for him every single day. She thought about a man deciding he was fine alone and being wrong about it for 11 years, and she thought about herself and the particular way that parallel landed in her chest. "I understand that," she said. "More than you know." He looked at her. "When I was 17, she said, the son of the family my father worked for told me I was pretty for a large girl." She said it without drama, without self-pity, the way you reported a weather event. "This happened. It was cold. It passed." He said it like he was being generous, like he was giving me something. She looked at her hands. "After that I just stopped expecting. I got very good at not wanting things because not wanting things meant nothing could be taken away." Ethan didn't say anything immediately, which was the right response. Then he said, "Whoever told you that was a fool." "I know that now," she said. "It took a while." "Did he think he was the authority on what you were worth?" "Most people do," she said. "Think they're the authority on what a woman like me is worth." Ethan's jaw tightened. Not in anger at her, she could read the difference by now. In anger at the thing she was describing. "Not in this house," he said. "Not ever." Clara looked at him. Something broke open in her chest. Not the hairline fracture from the church steps. Something bigger. Something that had been cracked all along and had finally split clean through and let the light flood in all at once. "Ethan," she said, and her voice came out different, lower, stripped of the careful management she usually kept on it. "I don't know what this is, what we are. I agreed to a legal arrangement, and I know what I agreed to, and I know that's what you agreed to, and I'm not asking you to—" "Clara," he said. She stopped. He leaned forward on the table. His eyes were very steady. "What if I told you the arrangement stopped being just an arrangement a while ago?" The kitchen was entirely silent. "For me," he said, "not presuming anything about you, but for me." Clara's heart was doing something she hadn't given it permission to do. "When?" she said. He thought about it honestly. "The morning I came in from the barn and you and Lily were at the table and she was showing you something in a book and you had your head close to hers and you were laughing," he said. "And I stood in the doorway and thought, this is what I built this house for. I just didn't know it until now." She stared at him. "That was the second week," she said. "Yes," he said. "Ethan." "I know," he said. "I know what you agreed to. I know you came here to save your sisters, and that was the whole of it. I'm not asking you to feel something you don't feel." He held her gaze. "But I am asking you to tell me if there's any chance you might." Clara looked at this man across the kitchen table, a man who had built her chairs and cut lumber and given her his bedroom and stood on church steps and told the truth to a county inspector and said her name like it meant something, and she thought about what it cost to let yourself want something when wanting had always ended badly. She thought about Lily's face when she cried. She thought about June saying he talks like Papa. She thought about herself standing in a kitchen that smelled of bread she had made without thinking about leaving. "There's more than a chance," she said. She said it quietly. She said it the way she said things when they were completely true, without decoration, without hedging, just the plain fact of it. Ethan let out a breath that told her he had been holding it. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. Neither of them reached across the table. They were two careful people who had both been wrong about things before, and they were not going to rush anything. But the space between them felt different now, not the managed distance of an arrangement, but the chosen distance of two people who were taking their time with something they intended to get right. The first trouble arrived 3 days later in the form of Silas Greer, not the shopkeeper Greer, his brother. Silas Greer owned the Red Hollow Bank, which meant in practical terms that Silas Greer owned the paper on half the property in the county, including mortgages that had been aging for years in the back of his ledgers, like debts he was saving for the right moment. Clara was in town at the dry goods store when she first heard his name attached to something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She overheard two women talking in the next aisle, not to her, not about her specifically, but about a family named Hollis, who had their cattle land north of town, and whose mortgage Silas Greer had apparently called in without warning, citing a clause in the original agreement that allowed him to demand full repayment if the market value of the property exceeded a certain threshold. "The Hollises have been on that land 15 years, the first woman said. And now he wants the whole amount in 60 days, or he takes it. He's been doing it all over the county, the second woman said lower. The Pattersons last spring, the Wades in April. Always the same, finds a clause, calls it in, takes the land when they can't pay. Clara bought her flour and salt and walked home thinking hard. That evening she set the information in front of Ethan without framing it. She told him what she'd heard word for word, and then she waited. Ethan's expression went through several changes, none of them visible to anyone who didn't know how to read him. Clara was beginning to know how to read him. "Silas Greer," he said. It wasn't a question. "You know him." "I know of him. He's been sniffing around this land for 3 years. He paused. "I've been careful not to carry any paper with his bank." Clara felt the cold understanding of it settle in. "But other people haven't." "The Hollises haven't," he said. "The Wades didn't." He was quiet. "The Pattersons are friends of mine." "What happened to the Pattersons?" Clara said. "They lost 40 acres in April," he said. "Moved their family to Casper." Clara looked at him. "And nobody did anything." "What's there to do?" he said. "If the clause is in the mortgage, he has the right." "Is the clause valid? Has anyone looked at the original documents?" Ethan was quiet. Clara pressed forward. "Because if he's been doing this systematically, if there's a pattern, then either the clause is being misapplied or it was written deceptively in the first place. Either way, there's a legal argument." Ethan looked at her. "How do you know that?" "My father dealt with the land claim dispute when I was 12, she said. "He couldn't afford a lawyer, but he went to the county office himself and read every document until he found the error. He won." She paused. "I was with him every day. I read those documents too." Ethan was very still. "I need to look at the Hollis mortgage," Clara said, "and the Patterson agreement if we can get it. And I need to talk to anyone else who's been through this." "Clara." "Ethan." She held his gaze. "This is what I can do. I am not a rancher, and I'm not a lawyer, but I can read documents, and I can find patterns, and I can sit in a county records office for as long as it takes." She paused. "Let me do something useful." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "The Hollis family comes to church." "Then I'll talk to Martha Hollis on Sunday," Clara said. She talked to Martha Hollis on Sunday. Martha was a worn-looking woman in her 40s with the hands of someone who had worked land her whole life and the eyes of someone who had recently stopped believing things would be all right. She sat with Clara in the churchyard after the service, while their husbands talked near the wagons, and she told Clara everything. The clause in the Hollis mortgage was on page 7 of the original document. It was written in the dense legal language that mortgage companies used specifically because it was difficult for ordinary people to parse. What it appeared to say, read plainly, was that the bank reserved the right to call the loan if the property value appreciated beyond a specified index. What it actually said, if you read it with the precision of someone who had spent time in county documents, was something slightly but significantly different. Clara read the copy. Martha showed her 3 times. Then she said, "Has Silas Greer given you the formal written demand?" 2 weeks ago, Martha said. "I need to see it." Martha brought it from her bag. She had been carrying it with her. Clara understood because people carried their disasters close when they didn't know what else to do with them. Clara read it. She read it again. She felt her heart kick hard against her ribs. "Martha," she said carefully, keeping her voice even, "Silas Greer's formal demand cites a subsection of the clause that does not exist in your original agreement." Martha stared at her. "What?" "He's citing subsection B," Clara said. "Your mortgage has a subsection A and a subsection C. There is no subsection B." She turned the original document over and showed her. "He invented it. Or someone in his office did. Either he's hoping you don't know what you signed, or he's counting on you not being able to read it carefully enough to know the difference." Martha's face went white, then red. "That's fraud," Martha said. "That's fraud," Clara agreed. She told Ethan that evening. He sat at the kitchen table and listened without interrupting the way he always listened, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "If this is what you think it is," he said, "Greer has been doing this to multiple families. I think he's been doing it to every family he can identify as unlikely to look closely," Clara said. "Families who are land poor and cash poor and who need lawyers they can't afford. He's been stripping the valley," Ethan said. It came out flat, which was more dangerous than anger. "We need the other documents," Clara said. "We need to know how many, and we need a pattern that's clear enough to take to a judge." Ethan looked at her. "The county judge is in Laramie." "Then we go to Laramie," Clara said. He looked at her a moment longer. "You came here to save your sisters," he said quietly, not as an accusation, as a recognition. "I came here to save my sisters," she agreed. "And now I'm here, and there are families losing their land." She met his eyes. "I know what it feels like to be told the law is going to take something from you, and there's nothing you can do. I know exactly what that feels like. And if there's something I can actually do about it for someone else." She paused. "I'm going to do it." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll ride to the Pattersons in Casper. If they still have their original documents." "They'll have them," Clara said. "People keep the papers that hurt them." He looked at her. "I know that too," she said. Something moved in his face, that open thing. The one she had seen in the kitchen during the inspector's visit, the one that didn't have the careful self-containment he normally wore. "Your father would be proud of you," he said. Clara looked at the table. "Go to Casper," she said. "I'll start with the county records office in town, whatever they'll show me." He left the next morning before dawn, and Clara was at the county records office when it opened with a list of names in her pocket and her father's methodical patience in her blood, and she started reading. She was still reading when the office closed. She was back the next morning, and the morning after that. On the fourth day, she found it. Not just a pattern, a template. Every mortgage that Silas Greer had issued in the past 4 years through the Red Hollow Bank used the same document structure, the same clauses in the same order. And in every mortgage where he had subsequently called the loan, she found 6, and suspected there were more. The formal demand letter cited subsections that did not exist in the original signed agreements. He had not made a mistake. He had not gotten confused. He was issuing demands based on phantom clauses counting on the recipients being too intimidated, too exhausted, or too poorly resourced to read the documents side by side. Clara sat in the county records office with 6 mortgage agreements and 6 demand letters spread across the table and felt something move through her that was neither triumph nor relief. It was colder than that, and more certain. It was the feeling of a woman who has found what she was looking for and now understands the full weight of what comes next. She organized the documents. She made careful notations. She copied out the relevant sections in her own handwriting so that anyone, a judge, a lawyer, a jury, could read them side by side and see exactly what had been done. Then she packed up her papers and walked home. Ethan was back from Casper. He was at the kitchen table when she came in, and across from him sat a man she didn't know, older, heavyset, with the careful clothing of someone who moved in professional circles. Ethan stood when she came in. "Clara," he said. "This is David Aldridge. He's a lawyer out of Cheyenne. He was in Casper when I got there. The Pattersons already hired him." Clara looked at the lawyer. "Mrs. Caldwell," Aldridge said, "your husband tells me you've been in the county records office." 4 days, she said. She set her papers on the table. "I have 6 cases. I believe there are more. All of them show the same pattern demand letters, citing clauses that don't appear in the signed originals." Aldridge looked at the papers. He picked up the first one and read for a long minute. Then he looked up at her. "How did you learn to read legal documents?" he said. "My father," she said. "And 4 days of practice." Aldridge looked at Ethan. Ethan looked back at him with the expression of a man who was not even slightly surprised. "Mrs. Caldwell," Aldridge said, turning back to Clara, "what you have here is enough to file for a full injunction against the Red Hollow Bank and a criminal fraud complaint against Silas Greer." He paused. "I need copies of everything. I need to speak to every family affected, and I'm going to need someone to testify to how these documents were found and what they show." He looked at her directly. "That would be you," he said. Clara looked at the papers on the table. She thought about Martha Hollis's face. She thought about 40 acres in April and a family in Casper. She thought about her father in a county office reading until he found the error winning. "All right," she said. Ethan was watching her. She looked at him. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His expression said everything. The steady pride of a man watching someone he believed in do exactly what he knew they were capable of. She turned back to Aldridge. "Where do we start?" she said. Outside the window, the summer light was going gold and long, and somewhere in the house, Lily and June were laughing at something, and the sound of it came through the walls like the most ordinary music in the world. And Clara stood in the kitchen of a house that was hers, beside a man who had never once looked at her and found her wanting, and she was not holding herself apart anymore. She was not braced for the floor to fall out. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was built to do. And for the first time in 2 years, that felt like enough. It felt like more than enough. It felt like the beginning of something. David Aldridge worked fast. Within 48 hours of sitting at Clara's kitchen table with her carefully organized documents spread before him, he had sent letters to every family on her list. Within a week, he had responses from 5 of the 6. Within 10 days, he had filed for an emergency injunction in Laramie to halt any further collection actions by the Red Hollow Bank pending a full fraud investigation. Clara knew all of this because Aldridge sent word through Ethan, and because Martha Hollis came to the ranch on a Tuesday afternoon and sat at the kitchen table and cried in the plain, exhausted way of a woman who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and had just been told she could set it down. "He can't take the land," Martha said. "Not while the injunction holds." "Not while it holds," Clara said carefully. "This isn't finished yet." "I know." Martha wiped her face with her sleeve without self-consciousness. "But last week I was looking at my husband trying to figure out how to tell him we were going to lose everything his father built. And now I'm not." She looked at Clara directly. "That's because of you." Clara shook her head. "That's because the documents told the truth." "Somebody had to read them," Martha said. "Somebody had to know what they were looking at." She paused. "You knew." Clara looked at her hands on the table. She thought about her father in the county office patient and methodical reading until he found the error. She thought about a 12-year-old girl sitting beside him reading to learning without knowing she was learning. "My father taught me," she said. Martha reached across the table and put her hand over Clara's. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. The injunction held for 11 days before Silas Greer responded. Clara had expected a legal counterfiling. She had expected Greer to send his own lawyers to Laramie with arguments about the validity of the mortgage clauses. She had expected a fight conducted through proper channels, slow and procedural and frustrating, but ultimately contained within the boundaries of the law. She had not expected what actually happened. She was at the county records office on a Wednesday afternoon, working through a 7th mortgage agreement she had found reference to in an earlier file, when Collins came through the door, looking like he had ridden hard to get there. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, slightly breathless. "You need to come home." She looked at him. "What happened?" "Greer's men came to the ranch." Clara was on her feet before he finished the sentence. She did not ask any more questions. She gathered her papers, folded them into her bag, and walked out of the records office and into the street where Collins had her horse waiting, and she rode the 2 miles to the ranch at a pace she hadn't ridden since she was a girl. Ethan was in the yard when she came through the gate. He was standing very still, which was how she knew something serious had happened. Ethan in stillness was Ethan containing something. Across from him stood 2 men she didn't recognize, both of them on horseback, both of them with the particular quality of ease that came from men who were accustomed to delivering unpleasant things on behalf of people with power. A 3rd man stood slightly apart. Silas Greer. She had seen him before at a distance at church at community gatherings, but never this close. He was a well-dressed man in his 50s, with a banker's soft hands and a politician's practiced pleasantness, the kind of face that had learned to arrange itself into whatever expression the moment required. Right now the expression was concern. Performed concern, the kind that didn't touch the eyes. Clara rode in and dismounted and walked directly to stand beside Ethan without looking at Greer yet. She looked at Ethan first. She needed to know what had been said. Ethan looked at her and gave a slight shake of his head. Not yet, wait. Wait, and she understood. Let me handle the introduction. Then we'll see where this goes. Mr. Greer, Ethan said, turning back to the banker. My wife. Greer turned his performed concern toward Clara and said, Mrs. Caldwell, I was just explaining to your husband that I believe there has been a serious misunderstanding. Has there? Clara said. It was not a question. The injunction that's been filed in Laramie. Greer paused with the air of a man choosing his words with great care. It's based on a reading of our mortgage documents that I'm afraid is not entirely accurate. There are technical aspects of mortgage law that can be confusing to people without legal training, and I would hate to see good families put through an unnecessary ordeal based on a misreading. Clara looked at him. She let the silence sit for a moment. Then she said, Which subsection would you like to discuss, Mr. Greer? The Hollis Agreement cites subsection B of Clause 7. The Patterson Mortgage cites subsection B of Clause 9. The Wade Agreement Clause 4. She paused. None of those agreements contain a subsection B. I have read every original document. I have copies. I have notarized the comparisons. She held his gaze. So I'd like to know which technical aspect of mortgage law you're referring to, because from where I'm standing, the reading is quite clear. Something moved behind Greer's eyes. The performed concern flickered. Mrs. Caldwell, he said, and his voice had dropped to a register she recognized the register men used when they had decided a woman was the actual problem and were adjusting their approach accordingly. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but these are complex legal matters, and perhaps it would be better if this conversation continued between the relevant parties. I am a relevant party, Clara said. Of course, he said in the tone that meant the opposite. Ethan said very quietly, I'd watch your next few words, Mr. Greer. Greer looked at Ethan. Something in what he saw made him reassess. I came here as a courtesy, Greer said, pulling his pleasantness back around him like a coat. To offer an opportunity to resolve this before it becomes a matter of public record that damages everyone involved. The families on that injunction list, I'm prepared to offer amended repayment terms, extended timelines, reasonable accommodations. He paused. But that offer requires the injunction to be withdrawn and the fraud complaint to be dropped. Clara looked at him. You want us to trade a criminal investigation, she said, for payment plans. I want to find a solution that works for everyone, he said. The solution that works for everyone, Clara said, is that you return the Wade property, restore the Patterson land, compensate the families you've already displaced, and answer to the court for what you've done. She paused. That's the solution. Greer's pleasantness evaporated. Not all at once. It went in stages like weather clearing, and what was underneath it was not anger exactly, but something colder. The expression of a man who had decided that a different kind of pressure was required. Mrs. Caldwell, he said, you've been in this county for what, 2 months? You arrived here with nothing, married a man you barely knew, to solve a legal problem with your sisters, and now you've decided to insert yourself into matters that have been settled between this bank and these families through proper legal channels. He let that sit. I would think carefully about the ground you're standing on before you make yourself an enemy of the most significant financial institution in this county. The yard was completely silent. Clara felt the words hit. She felt them the way she felt all the things that were meant to make her smaller, with the particular cold clarity of a woman who had been practicing her whole life at not being made smaller. She took one breath. Then she said, The ground I'm standing on is documented fact, Mr. Greer. You can question my history, and you can question my marriage, and you can question every choice I've made since I arrived in this county. But you cannot make subsection B appear in a document where it doesn't exist. She stepped forward once, not aggressively, but deliberately closing the distance between them by exactly enough to make her point. So take your offer back to your bank and explain to your lawyers why 6 families have original mortgage agreements that don't say what your demand letters say they say. That's the conversation you need to be having. Greer stared at her. One of his men shifted in his saddle. Ethan hadn't moved. He stood exactly where he had been standing since Clara rode in, and his stillness was not the stillness of a man holding himself back. It was the stillness of the man who had assessed the situation and determined that his wife had it completely in hand. Greer gathered himself. "This isn't over," he said. "No," Clara agreed. "It isn't. That's rather the point." Greer turned his horse and rode out through the gate. His 2 men followed. The yard was quiet. Clara stood where she was for a moment after the sound of hoofbeats faded. Then she let out a breath that started at the bottom of her lungs and came all the way up. Ethan came to stand beside her. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. And then, because it was true, "My hands are shaking." "Your voice wasn't," he said. She looked at her hands. They were shaking. She closed them into fists and then opened them again. "He came here to intimidate us into backing down," she said. "I know. He knew about the sisters. He knew I married you to keep them. He did his research." "Yes," Ethan said. "He thought it would work," she said. "He thought if he pointed at the most vulnerable parts of my situation, I would flinch." "Did you flinch?" She looked at him. No. Something in Ethan's expression shifted into something she had come to recognize as the closest he came to open admiration. He did not perform it. It simply appeared on his face the way weather appeared without announcement, because the conditions had produced it. "No," he said. "You didn't." The story of what happened in the Caldwell yard spread through Red Hollow. The way stories spread in small towns, fast with modifications gaining weight with each telling. By Sunday, it had reached the church steps. By Monday, it had reached the mercantile. By Tuesday, Martha Hollis had been stopped 3 times in the street by people asking whether it was true that Clara Caldwell had told Silas Greer to his face that he was a fraud. The version that circulated was somewhat more dramatic than what had actually occurred. In the town's telling, Clara had apparently produced documents from her coat, recited legal subsections from memory, and reduced Greer to speechlessness before sending him off her property. Clara heard this version from June, who had heard it from the blacksmith's daughter, who was 6 years old and had clearly received the story pre-embellished. "She says you made him cry," June reported with enormous satisfaction. "He didn't cry," Clara said. "A little," June pressed. June. "Lily says he probably cried after he left," June said, "where nobody could see." Clara looked at Lee, who was sitting at the table with a book and the expression of someone who has been quoted accurately and has no intention of retracting it. "Lily," Clara said. "How was very red," Lily said without looking up from her book. "That's practically the same thing." Aldridge sent word from Laramie, 10 days after Greer's visit to the ranch. The fraud investigation had been formally opened. The Wyoming Territorial Prosecutor's Office had taken an interest. 2 of Greer's bank employees had already agreed to speak to investigators, which Aldridge noted in his letter with the restrained excitement of a man who knew what cooperating witnesses meant for a case. He also noted in the final paragraph that the Hollis injunction had been made permanent, pending the outcome of the investigation, that the bank had been prohibited from issuing any new collection actions in the county, and that he expected formal charges to be filed within the month. He wrote, "The documents you compiled were the foundation of this case. I have been practicing law for 22 years, and I have rarely seen a layperson produce more organized or more clearly annotated comparative evidence. You should know that." Clara read the letter at the kitchen table. She read it twice. Then she folded it and set it down and sat quietly for a moment. Ethan was across from her. He had read it too. 22 years, he said. "Don't," she said. "I'm just noting." "Ethan." He smiled. Not the almost smile she had been seeing for weeks. An actual smile, unhurried and genuine, and it changed his entire face in a way that made her chest do something inconvenient. "Your father would have something to say about this," he said. "He would have said I should have been a lawyer," she said. "He would have been right." She looked at the letter again. She thought about the Pattersons and Casper. She thought about Martha Hollis carrying the demand letter in her bag because people kept the papers that hurt them. She thought about 6 families, and probably more, and a man with a banker's soft hands who had looked at them and calculated that they wouldn't look closely enough. "It's not enough," she said. Ethan looked at her. The charges aren't filed yet. That's not what I mean. She looked up. The Pattersons already lost 40 acres. They're in Casper. Even if Greer is convicted, even if the court orders restitution, they've lost a year of their lives. The Wades. She stopped. It's not enough to stop it. Someone should have stopped it sooner. There was no one to stop it sooner, Ethan said. There could have been, she said. If there had been someone in this county whose job it was to look at these things, not a lawyer, just someone who understood documents and knew what to look for, this could have been caught 2 years ago. Ethan was watching her with the careful attention he gave to things he was taking seriously. What are you thinking? He said. I'm thinking, she said slowly, that there are probably people in this county right now who are sitting with paperwork. They don't understand making decisions about land and money and their children's futures based on documents they've been told they don't need to worry about. She paused. And I know how to read those documents. Ethan was quiet for a moment. You want to help them, he said. I want to do something useful, she said. Something that matters beyond this case. He looked at her steadily. That's not a small thing you're talking about. No, she agreed. It isn't. He picked up his coffee cup, put it down, picked it up again. Clara recognized this as Ethan thinking, not stalling, genuinely working through something. There's a building on Mill Street, he said. Been empty 2 years. Henderson used it for a claims office before he moved to Denver. He paused. It's not large, but it would serve. Clara stared at him. You're not serious. I own the note on it, he said. Henderson left owing me 3 months of rent. I took the building instead. He looked at her. It's been sitting there. Ethan. You need a place where people can bring their paperwork, he said. Where they can sit down with someone who will read it with them and tell them what it says. Where they don't have to be afraid of what they don't understand. He held her gaze. That's a real thing. That's something this county needs and doesn't have. Clara looked at him. She thought about the woman she had been 4 months ago, standing in front of the county clerk's desk with both hands flat on the counter and 60 days and one name written on a piece of paper in her pocket. She thought about walking 2 miles down a road, not knowing if the man at the end of it would even open the door. She thought about what happened when someone opened the door. It would take time, she said. People would have to trust me. They already trust you, he said. You just don't know it yet. She looked at him. After what happened with Greer, he said, half the county knows your name. The half that doesn't will know it when the charges are filed. He paused. You did something that people with money and power and legal training couldn't or wouldn't do. And you did it with 4 days in the records office and your father's patience. He set down the coffee cup. Up to people remember that. Clara was quiet for a long time. I'd need someone to watch the girls some days, she said finally. Mrs. Paulson, he said immediately. She's already offered, twice. Clara looked at him. She's already offered. She came by last week, he said. She said, and I'm quoting her directly, that if Clara Caldwell ever needs her hands free to do what she's clearly meant to be doing, her door is open. Clara felt something rise in her chest that she didn't entirely have a name for. It was too large for gratitude and too specific for happiness. It was the feeling of a life rearranging itself around a person who had finally stopped bracing against it. You've been planning this, she said. I've been thinking about it, he said. There's a difference. The decision is yours. She looked at the letter from Aldridge on the table. She looked at Ethan. She said, when can I see the building? Okay. I took her to Mill Street the next morning. The building was small, 2 rooms, and a narrow front space that had served as a waiting area for Henderson's claims office. It needed cleaning, and one of the window panes needed replacing, but the bones of it were solid, and the shelving along the back wall was intact, and more than adequate for the kind of organized filing system Clara already had running in her head. She stood in the middle of the front room and turned slowly, assessing. The shelving is good, she said. Henderson built it himself, Ethan said. He was a man who overbuilt everything. Floors solid, too. Clara looked at the empty shelves. In her mind, she was already seeing it. The organized files, the clearly labeled categories. The kind of careful system that meant when someone came through the door with a paper they didn't understand, she would be able to find the relevant precedent and the relevant records within minutes rather than days. She was already seeing the people who would come. The ranch wife who didn't understand what she'd signed when her husband took a loan. The homesteader who couldn't read the water rights agreement the county had sent him. The widow trying to figure out whether the claim her husband filed before he died was still valid. All the people who had been told the paperwork was fine, don't worry about it, we'll handle it. She thought about her father. Patient and methodical and absolutely certain that if you read long enough and carefully enough, the truth was in there. She thought about what he had built in her without knowing he was building it. Yes, she said. Ethan looked at her. Yes. Yes, she said. Let's open it. The first person through the door was Martha Hollis, which was not surprising, because Martha had apparently told half the county what Clara had done with her mortgage documents and felt personally responsible for introducing the other half. She came with her sister-in-law, who had a water rights dispute she'd been trying to resolve for 18 months. Clara sat across the table from the sister-in-law, whose name was Ruth, and read the water rights agreement carefully, and found in it within 20 minutes a boundary description that had been incorrectly transcribed from the original survey. The error was not fraud, it was a clerical mistake, but it was a clerical mistake that had been costing Ruth access to a creek that was legally hers. Ruth sat at the table and stared at Clara with the expression of someone who has been told they can have back something they had given up on. 18 months, Ruth said. I know, Clara said. I went to 2 lawyers, Ruth said. They told me it would take years and cost more than the water was worth. They weren't wrong about the years, Clara said. If you'd gone through the courts. But this is a transcription error in a county document. You go to the county surveyor's office, not a court. You show them this comparison. She tapped the 2 pages, and they correct the record. It shouldn't take more than 6 weeks. Ruth looked at the pages. Then she looked at Clara. How much do I owe you? Clara said, nothing. Ruth blinked. This is a service, Clara said. Not a business. Bring me the corrected record when it comes through so I can file it. Ruth left with the copies Clara had made, and a look on her face that Clara recognized because she had worn it herself, the look of someone who has been carrying something heavy and has just been told they can put it down. Martha lingered after Ruth left. How many people have you seen this week? She asked. 7, Clara said. Since Tuesday. Martha looked around the small office, the organized files, the careful annotations, the stack of county record copies that Clara had been methodically building since her first visit to the records office. You did all this in a week. I had a system already, Clara said. You always have a system, Martha said. It wasn't a criticism. It was something closer to awe. It was a Thursday evening, 3 weeks into what the town had started calling without official sanction. Clara's office. When Ethan came in late from the south pasture and found Clara still at the kitchen table at 9 o'clock with 4 files open in front of her and the lamp burning low. He stood in the doorway for a moment. She looked up. The girls are in bed, she said. Supper's on the stove. I know, he said. I checked on them. He came to the table and sat down. He looked at the files. How many today? 9, she said. And a letter from Aldridge. The prosecutor has subpoenaed Greer's internal bank records. That's good. That's very good, she said. If those records show what I think they show, there are at least 4 more families we haven't identified yet. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Clara. She looked up from the file. When did you last eat? He said. She thought about it. Noon, she said. He got up without a word and went to the stove and came back with a plate and set it in front of her and sat back down. She looked at the plate. She looked at him. You don't have to, she started. I know I don't, he said. Eat. She ate. They sat at the kitchen table in the quiet of the house, the girls asleep upstairs, the lamp burning between them. 4 files open on the table and a plate of food getting steadily emptier, and it was so ordinary and so particular and so completely unlike anything Clara had imagined for herself 3 months ago that she had to set her fork down for a moment. "What?" Ethan said. "Nothing," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. "I was thinking," she said, "about the day I walked down your road." He waited. "I had the county letter in my pocket and one name on a piece of paper," she said. "I had decided that if you said no, there would be something else. Another way. I told myself that, so I could make my feet move." She paused. "But I didn't believe it." "I know," he said. "You were the last door," she said. "You just didn't know it." He was quiet. "I knew," he said. She stared at him. "When you sat down at my table," he said, "I saw what it had cost you to come. I saw a woman who had used up every other option and was sitting in front of a man she didn't know and asking him to save her family, and doing it with her spine straight and her voice steady." He held her gaze. "I knew you didn't have another door, and I knew that if I said no, you would have gone out and found one anyway, because that's who you are." He paused. "But I didn't want to say no." Clara looked at him. "Not just because of my promise to your father," he said. "Because I looked at you and I thought—" He stopped, started again. "I thought, here is a person worth knowing." The lamp burned between them. Outside, something moved in the grass. A night animal wind, the ordinary sounds of a living place. Clara reached across the table. She put her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held hers, and neither of them said anything, and there was nothing that needed saying, because they were two people who had spent their lives being careful with words, and they both understood that some moments were too real for language. They sat like that for a long time. The files stayed open on the table. The lamp burned steady. Somewhere in the house a floorboard settled with the small, intimate sound of a building breathing. Clara thought, "This is what I did not know I was walking toward. This man, this house, this life, hers. All of it finally and completely hers." The hand-holding at the kitchen table was not discussed the next morning. This was not avoidance. This was simply how two careful people moved, not rushing the thing they had found, not pressing it into a shape before it was ready, trusting that what was real did not require constant verification. Clara came downstairs, and Ethan was at the table with his ledger and his coffee, and he looked up when she came in, and something passed between them that had no name and needed none. She poured her coffee. She started the stove. The morning began the way mornings began, but something had shifted, and they both knew it, and the knowing sat between them like a warm thing. June noticed first, because June noticed everything that involved feelings, and had the 6-year-old's complete absence of subtlety about reporting what she observed. "You're smiling," she told Clara at breakfast with the air of someone producing evidence. "I smile," Clara said. "Not like that," June said. "That's a different smile." Lily, without looking up from her biscuit, said, "June, what, it's true." "June." June subsided, but she looked at Ethan with enormous, meaningful eyes that communicated everything she had been asked not to say out loud. And Ethan looked back at her with the expression of a man who was working very hard to keep his face neutral and was approximately 60% successful. Clara took a long drink of coffee and said nothing. It was the best breakfast she could remember in years. The prosecutor's subpoena of Greer's internal bank records produced exactly what Clara had suspected it would. Aldridge sent word on a Friday, not a letter this time, but a telegram, which told Clara everything she needed to know about his level of urgency before she even read the words. The bank records showed 10 additional families. 10 families beyond the 6 she had already documented. All of them served with demand letters, citing non-existent mortgage subsections. All of them in varying stages of compliance or resistance. 3 of them already having surrendered property. They had no legal obligation to surrender. 10 more families. Clara sat with the telegram in the office on Mill Street and felt the numbers settle into her like cold water. She had known there were more. She had said so from the beginning. But knowing and seeing the confirmation in black ink on yellow paper were 2 different things, and the difference hit her in the chest in a way she hadn't quite prepared for. She went home and told Ethan. He read the telegram. He set it down. He was quiet for a moment, in the way that meant he was deciding something. "The 3 families that already gave up property," he said. "Where are they?" "2 are still in the county," Clara said. "1 moved to Casper like the Pattersons." "I want to talk to the 2 that are still here," he said. Clara looked at him. "Why?" "Because if Greer took land through fraud, the court can order it returned," he said. "But only if those families are part of the case. Only if they file." He looked at her. "They need to know they can file. Aldridge can contact them." "Aldridge is a lawyer from Cheyenne," Ethan said. "They don't know him. They're already afraid." He paused. "They know me. Or they know of me. I've been in this county 11 years. He held her gaze. "Let me do something useful." She looked at him. He had said it back to her. Her own words from the night she had laid out the Greer case on the kitchen table and told him she needed to act. "Let me do something useful." "All right," she said. He rode out the next morning. He came back that evening with both families confirmed, the Durans and the elderly widow Elspeth Crane, who had signed over 12 acres of creek-adjacent grazing land to Greer's bank 6 months ago and had been telling herself ever since that it had been her own fault for not understanding what she was signing. Ethan had sat in Elspeth Crane's kitchen for 2 hours, drinking her coffee and listening to her explain herself, and at the end of it, he had told her plainly that it was not her fault that she had been deceived by someone who was paid to understand what she didn't, and that there was a path to getting her land back if she was willing to take it. He told Clara all of this at the kitchen table that night. "She cried," he said. "When I told her it wasn't her fault. She cried." Clara looked at him. "She'd been carrying that for 6 months," he said, "thinking she'd failed her husband's land." "Her husband's been gone how long?" Clara said. 8 years, Ethan said. Clara was quiet for a moment. She thought about Elspeth Crane in her kitchen, 8 years of managing alone, signing a paper she didn't fully understand because there was no one beside her to read it with her, and then carrying the weight of believing it had been her own failing. "She's filing," Clara said. "She's filing," Ethan said. "I told her you'd help her with the documents." "Of course I will," Clara said. He looked at her across the table. 16 families, Clara. 16, she said. 1 man, he said. 1 man with a bank and a template and a calculation that nobody would look closely enough. "People look now," Clara said. "Because of you," he said. "Because of my father," she said. "He's the one who taught me to read." Ethan shook his head. "He taught you to read. You're the one who decided to look." The formal charges against Silas Greer were filed on a Tuesday in late September, 6 weeks after Aldridge had first sat at their kitchen table. Clara was in the office on Mill Street when Aldridge arrived in person to tell her. He came through the door with the contained energy of a man delivering significant news and the professional composure of someone who had been doing this long enough not to make theater of it. He shook her hand. He shook it the way Ethan had shaken her hand the day she proposed to him, equally as a person he was conducting serious business with. 14 counts of mortgage fraud, he said. 3 counts of fraudulent misrepresentation. The territorial prosecutor is seeking full restitution for every affected family and criminal penalties. He paused. The preliminary hearing is in Laramie in 3 weeks. Clara set down the pen she had been holding. "The families, they'll all be named. Every one of them," Aldridge said, "including Mrs. Crane." Clara nodded. "I want to be clear about something," Aldridge said. He was looking at her directly. "This case exists because of what you found in the county records office. The prosecutor's argument is built on the comparative document analysis you produced. Your work is the foundation." He paused. "I've told the prosecutor's office that. I want you to know I've told them." Clara looked at the files on her desk. At the organized stacks, the clear notations, the careful system she had built over weeks of methodical work. She thought about her father. She thought about a 12-year-old girl reading county documents beside a man who believed absolutely and without qualification that the truth was in there if you read long enough. "He would have found it himself," she said. "My father. Given time, he would have found it." Aldridge tilted his head slightly. "Perhaps," he said. "But he wasn't here. You were." The night before the preliminary hearing, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in the wide bed in the room that had been Ethan's, that was hers, now in every way that mattered, and she stared at the ceiling and went through the documents in her head, the way she always did when she needed to be certain. Every comparison, every discrepancy, every phantom subsection that Greer's bank had cited in a demand letter, and that did not exist in the signed original. She knew them all. She had read them so many times they had become part of her, the way her father's voice had become part of her, the way the smell of the flour, and the sound of the morning coffee, and the weight of Ethan's hand over hers had become part of her. She heard the floor creak in the hallway. A knock. Quiet, so as not to wake the girls. "Clara," Ethan's voice low. "You awake?" "Yes," she said. A pause. Then, "You want company?" She considered. "Yes," she said. He came in and sat in the chair by the window, not on the bed. Two careful people taking their time, and in the dark he said, "Tell me what you're thinking about." "The Crane document," she said. "Clause 11. I keep going back to it." "What about it?" "The language is slightly different from the others," she said. "Not the subsection that's the same, but the surrounding language. I think he drafted that one himself instead of using the template, which means he knew exactly what he was doing when he wrote it." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Does Aldridge know?" "I sent him a letter yesterday," she said. "He'll have it before the hearing." Another pause. "Clara," he said. You're going to be all right tomorrow." She looked toward his voice in the dark. "I know," she said. And then, because it was 3 a.m. and she was tired and honest, "I'm not worried about the hearing. I'm worried about what comes after." "What do you mean?" She was quiet for a moment, finding the words. "When I came here, I had one thing I was trying to do. Keep the girls. That was everything, the only thing. And once the county letter came through, I thought that's it. That's done. I can breathe." She paused. "But then there was Greer, and then the office. And now there are 16 families, and a criminal prosecution, and Aldridge telling me the case is built on my work." She stopped. "I didn't come here intending to be any of this." "I know," Ethan said. "I came here to save my sisters," she said. "You did that," he said. "And then I couldn't stop," she said. The quiet settled. Then Ethan said, "Your father couldn't stop either. When he saw something wrong, he read until he found the answer. When he found the answer, he used it." He paused. "You're not doing something different from what he raised you to do. You're doing exactly what he raised you to do. The only difference is the scale." Clara looked at the ceiling. "He'd have opinions about the scale," she said. "He'd be proud of every inch of it," Ethan said. She let that settle. "Go to sleep," he said, standing. "I'll be downstairs." "Ethan," he stopped. "Thank you," she said, "for sitting up with me." "Always," he said. Simple as that. Always. She slept. The hearing in Laramie lasted 2 days. Clara was not required to testify. Her documents spoke for themselves, introduced into evidence by Aldridge with the methodical clarity of a man who understood that organized facts were more devastating than dramatic argument. But she was there. She sat in the gallery with Ethan beside her, and she watched the prosecutor lay out 14 counts of mortgage fraud on the foundation of the comparative analysis she had built in a county records office over 4 days the previous summer. She watched Greer's lawyer try to argue that the subsection discrepancies were clerical errors. She watched Aldridge produce 5 separate demand letters, all citing subsection B, all for mortgages that contained no such subsection, and ask the court to consider the mathematical probability of the same clerical error occurring identically across 5 separate documents issued to 5 separate families over 18 months. She watched the judge's face during that argument. She had learned to read faces a long time ago, the same way she had learned to read documents carefully, methodically, attending to what was actually there, rather than what she hoped or feared to find. What she found in the judge's face during Aldridge's argument was the particular quality of attention That meant he had already understood the point and was listening to confirm what he had already concluded. On the second day, the judge issued a ruling on the preliminary questions and bound the case over for full trial. He also issued an immediate order requiring the bank to produce all original mortgage documents and all demand letters for court review and prohibiting any further collection activity pending the outcome. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Aldridge shook Clara's hand again. "Full trial in January," he said. "This is going where it needs to go." Clara nodded, beside her. Ethan put his hand at the small of her back, that gesture she had come to know, the one that said, "I am here without requiring words," and she leaned into it, just slightly, just enough. They drove home from Laramie in the afternoon light, and for a long time neither of them spoke, and the silence was the kind that came after something significant had been completed, not empty but full, the way a room felt after something important had happened in it. It was Ethan who broke it. "I have something to ask you," he said. Clara looked at him. His eyes were on the road. His hands were easy on the reins, but she could see in the set of his shoulders that he was holding something carefully. "All right," she said. He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "When you came to my door you asked for a legal marriage. A year, you said. Long enough to satisfy the county." Clara's heart did something. "I remember," she said carefully. "The county is satisfied," he said. She waited. "The year isn't up," he said. "But the reason you came is resolved. Your sisters have a home. The arrangement we agreed to has done what you needed it to do." He paused. "So I want to ask you something and I need you to answer it honestly. Not based on what you think you owe me. Not based on gratitude. Honestly." She turned to face him fully on the wagon seat. He still wasn't looking at her. His jaw was tight in the way it got when he was saying something that cost him. "Do you want to stay?" he said. "Not because you have to. Not because the girls are settled here and it's easier. But because you want to. Because this is where you choose to be." He paused. "Because I'm who you choose." The wagon moved through the afternoon. The light was going gold across the grass. Clara looked at this man. She looked at him the way she looked at documents she needed to understand completely carefully without hurrying attending to what was actually there. What was? There was a man who had built her chairs before she arrived, who had given her his bedroom, and his name, and his ledger notations, and his patient, careful presence every single day, who had ridden to Casper and sat in Elspeth Crane's kitchen for 2 hours and come home and told her about it. With something in his voice she recognized as the same thing. She felt the feeling of having done the thing you were meant to do. Who had sat in her room in the dark at 3 in the morning and said always like it was the most straightforward word in the language. Who had looked at her on the first day and said, "You look like your father," and meant it as a gift. "Ethan," she said. He looked at her then. "I stopped treating this as temporary 3 months ago," she said. "I doubled the flower batch without thinking about it. I started planning for winter. I started thinking about next spring's garden." She held his gaze. "I stopped saying this house and started saying home somewhere around the time you came back from Casper. I didn't notice until it was already true." His jaw loosened. "I'm not staying because I owe you," she said. "I'm not staying because the girls are settled though they are. I'm not staying because it's easier though it is." She paused. "I'm staying because when I try to imagine being anywhere else the picture doesn't work. Because you are the most decent, most honest, most quietly extraordinary man I have ever known. And because somewhere between the county letter and the flower batch and your hand over mine at the kitchen table, I fell in love with you." She said it the way she said everything that was completely true, plainly without decoration, just the fact of it. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop. He sat for a moment. Then he turned to her fully, and she saw on his face that open thing she had first seen in the kitchen the day the inspector came, that unguarded expression, the one that didn't have his careful self-containment anywhere in it. "I have been in love with you," he said. "Since the morning I walked into the kitchen and you were reading Lily something from a book and you were laughing, and I stood in the doorway and thought, this is what I built this house for." She remembered him saying that. The second week. "You told me that before," she said. "I know," he said. I'm telling you again. Differently. He reached across and took her hand the way he had at the kitchen table, turning it over, holding it properly, not briefly. I'm asking you to be my wife, not on paper, not for the county, mine. He paused. Is that something you'll have? Clara looked at him. She thought about the woman who had stood on the road outside his gate with a letter in her pocket, and one name on a piece of paper, and no idea whether the door would open. The door had opened. Yes, she said. That's something I'll have. He brought her hand up and held it for a moment, and then he did something she had not seen him do. He pressed his lips to her knuckles, brief and certain, the way he did everything that mattered. She felt it in her whole body. They told the girls that evening at supper. June shrieked and knocked over her milk, which was the most June response possible, and which broke the solemnity of the moment in the best way, and in the chaos of mopping up milk and settling June down, and Lily saying, "June, honestly," in her most long-suffering voice. The thing became ordinary, became real, in the specific way that things became real when they were absorbed into the daily texture of a family's life, after the milk was mopped and the supper was resumed. Lily looked at Ethan with her direct, weighing gaze. You asked her, Lily said. I did, he said. What did you ask exactly? Lily, Clara said. I want to know how he said it, Lily said with complete composure. Ethan looked at Lily. I asked her if she would be my wife, he said. And she said yes. Lily considered this for a moment. Then she said, Did you tell her she was the strongest woman you ever knew? Ethan blinked. Not in those words. You should have, Lily said with complete authority. That's the most important part. Clara looked at her sister. Ethan looked at Clara. She's right, he said. He looked at Clara directly and said plainly and without performance, You are the strongest woman I have ever known. Clara felt it land. She did not look away. She held his gaze and let herself receive it, which was still new, which she was still learning, which got a little easier every day. I know, she said. And for the first time in her life, she meant it. Silas Greer was convicted the following January on 11 of 14 counts. The court ordered full restitution to every affected family. The Pattersons came back from Casper. Elspeth Crane's 12 acres were returned with a court document that said in plain legal language that the original transfer had been obtained through fraud and was void from the beginning. The Hollises kept their land. The Wades received a settlement that rebuilt what they had lost. Clara was in the courtroom in Laramie when the verdict was read. She sat beside Ethan, and she held his hand, and she thought about her father reading documents in a county office, patient and certain, and she thought about a 12-year-old girl learning to look. She thought about 60 days. She thought about one name on a piece of paper. She thought about what opened up when one door did. The office on Mill Street became something none of them had initially planned for it to become. It became known quietly, and then less quietly across 3 counties. People came for mortgage documents and water rights agreements, and homestead claims, and land disputes, and the full range of things that ordinary people signed without fully understanding, and that sometimes cost them everything. Clara read every document. She explained what she found. She charged nothing. She referred the cases she couldn't resolve to Aldridge, who had begun driving out from Cheyenne once a month, and who told her plainly on his 3rd visit that he had never had a better unpaid paralegal in 22 years of practice. She told him she wasn't his paralegal. He told her she simply wasn't getting paid for it. She told him that would need to change. It changed. The ranch ran well. Ethan had always run it well. But with Clara managing the accounts with the same methodical precision, she applied to everything. Finding savings he had missed. Catching billing errors from suppliers, organizing the cattle records with a clarity that made every previous year's bookkeeping look like guesswork. It ran better. By the following summer, it was the most efficiently documented operation in the county, a fact that Collins reported to anyone who would listen, with the enthusiasm of a man who had personally witnessed something remarkable. Lily turned 12 and started helping in the office on Saturdays, which was her own decision, announced at breakfast one morning as a simple statement of intent. I want to learn, she said. How to read the documents. Clara looked at her. Your grandfather taught me, Clara said. I'll teach you. Lily nodded satisfied and went back to her breakfast. June, for her part, had by this time formed an attachment to the Caldwell horses so total and so complete that Ethan had designated the bay mare with the crooked blaze as officially June's, a decision that June received with the gravity of someone accepting a serious responsibility, and immediately celebrated by naming the horse after herself, which Clara told her was deeply unimaginative, and June said she didn't care. It was a Sunday evening in the second summer when Clara came out to the porch and found Ethan in his chair, looking out at the land, the way he sometimes did, at the end of a day, not brooding, just present, attending to the particular quality of the light. She sat in the other chair. Brewster told me, she said, that when he first heard you'd married me, he thought you'd lost your mind. Ethan looked at her. When did he tell you that? Last week, she said. He also said that by the second month, he thought it was the sanest thing you'd ever done. Ethan looked back at the land. Brewster talks too much. Brewster talks exactly the right amount, Clara said. He just talks at unexpected times. A pause. What do you think? Ethan said, looking back. Clara considered the question honestly, the way she considered everything that deserved it. She thought about the clerk's desk and the county letter and the 2 miles of road she had walked with one name on a piece of paper. She thought about coffee poured without self-consciousness and chairs built to the right width, and a man who shook her hand like she was a person of consequence. She thought about Lily crying in relief, and June saying he talks like Papa, and the lumber in the storage room cut 2 weeks before she arrived. She thought about a kitchen table at 3 a.m. and a hand turned palm up, and always said like the most natural word in any language. She thought about 16 families and a verdict in January, and her father's patience living on in her hands, and her eyes, and everything she had built with them. She thought about what it meant to walk toward a door, not knowing if it would open, and what it meant when it did. I think, she said, that I came here to save my sisters. You did, Ethan said. And I think, she said, that in doing it, I found out what I was actually for. He looked at her. She looked back at him. This man, this home, this life, she had not planned, and could not have imagined, and would not trade for anything the world had ever offered her. I think my father knew, she said quietly. When he made you promise. I think he knew what the promise would become. Ethan was still. I think so too, he said. The evening settled around them. Somewhere in the house, Lily and June were laughing at something, the sound of it coming through the walls, like the most ordinary music, like the sound of children who knew they were safe, who had stopped bracing for the floor to fall out, who had put their weight down and found something solid underneath. Clara reached across and took Ethan's hand. He held it. They sat on the porch of a house built for permanence, in a life built from a promise, and all the years that stretched out ahead of them were not uncertain or frightening or contingent on something holding. They were simply there, waiting, already theirs. A woman who came with nothing but a county letter and 2 sisters, and the stubborn refusal to let love be defeated by paperwork, had built something that would outlast every doubt anyone had ever had about her, including her own. She had come to save her sisters. She had done that, and more still. She had saved herself. And she had done it the only way that had ever worked for her, by walking toward the door, by reading until she found the truth, by refusing to be made smaller than she was, and by letting finally and completely the right person see her clearly. Ethan Caldwell had married her because he made a promise to a dead man. He stayed because she was extraordinary. And Clara Bellamy Caldwell, who had once written one name on a piece of paper in a rented room above a laundry with nothing but love and desperation, and her father's stubborn belief that the truth was always in there. If you looked, had finally, after all of it, come home.